My parents treated me poorly, so out of spite, I became successful. When they came back, they sued me to take my company away. Growing up, my life was hell. When I say that, I'm not exaggerating. My parents, David and Carol, made it very clear from as far back as I can remember that I was more of a burden than a blessing. They weren't the warm, nurturing types. In fact, they seemed to resent the very fact that I existed. They weren't abusive in the traditional sense, not physically, but the emotional scars they left me with were deep and lasting. David was the type of man who believed that showing any form of emotion was a sign of weakness. He was a hard worker. I'll give him that, but he had no idea how to be a father. He was stern, cold, and distant. He spent most of his time at work, and when he was home, he was usually holed up in his study, working on God knows what. On the rare occasions when we interacted, it was always brief and always critical. "Why can't you be more like your cousin Liam?" he'd say, as if I could somehow shape myself into the image of another person just to satisfy his unreasonable expectations. I wasn't allowed to have my own dreams or interests. I was supposed to be a miniature version of him, a prospect that terrified me. Carol, my mother, was no better. She was a stay-at-home mom, but calling her a mom in any nurturing sense of the word feels wrong. She was more like a warden, constantly watching over me, not out of concern, but out of a need to control every aspect of my life. She criticized everything: my appearance, my grades, my friends, the few that I had, even the way I walked. Nothing I did was ever good enough for her. If I got an A on a test, she'd ask why it wasn't an A+. If I showed any interest in something that didn't align with her narrow view of what was acceptable, she'd shut it down immediately. For years, I lived in a constant state of anxiety, always on edge, always trying to anticipate their next criticism so I could somehow avoid it. But it never worked. No matter what I did, it was wrong. I remember one day in middle school, I came home excited because I had won first place in the school science fair. I thought, just maybe, this would be something they'd be proud of. I was wrong. When I showed them the trophy, my father barely looked up from his newspaper. "That's nice," he said in the most uninterested tone you can imagine. My mother took one glance at it and said, "That's great, but wouldn't it have been better if you had won a math competition instead? Science is fine, but math is the foundation of everything." That was the moment I realized that no matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, it would never be enough. I was destined to be a disappointment in their eyes, and there was nothing I could do to change that. So, I stopped trying to impress them. I withdrew into myself, spending most of my time alone in my room, reading books, playing video games, and dreaming of a life where I could be myself without fear of judgment. It wasn't until high school that I met someone who would change my life forever: Ethan. Ethan was everything I wasn't: confident, outgoing, and seemingly unbothered by what others thought of him. We met in our freshman year, in a particularly awkward encounter in the school library. I was hiding out in one of the back corners, trying to avoid the usual lunchtime chaos, when Ethan came over and struck up a conversation. I was shy, barely able to string a sentence together, but Ethan didn't seem to mind. He had this way of making you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room, even if you weren't saying much. We quickly became inseparable. Ethan introduced me to his group of friends, who were just as welcoming as he was. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. We'd spend hours after school hanging out at his house, which was the complete opposite of mine. His parents were warm and friendly, always eager to make us snacks and ask us about our day. It was a world I didn't know existed, a world where parents actually cared about their kids and wanted to see them happy. But as much as I loved spending time at Ethan's, I couldn't escape the reality of my own home. My parents didn't approve of Ethan, of course. They thought he was a bad influence, mainly because he didn't fit into their rigid idea of what a good kid should be. He was too free-spirited, too rebellious for their liking. But I didn't care. For the first time, I had someone who saw me for who I was and didn't expect me to be anything else. As we grew closer, Ethan and I started talking about our futures. We were both drawn to the idea of going to college, not just to get away from our respective homes, but because we both had a passion for learning and wanted to build something better for ourselves. We spent countless nights planning out our lives, dreaming of what we could achieve if we just had the chance. We both agreed that marketing was the field we wanted to go into. It seemed like the perfect blend of creativity and strategy, and we were both excited about the prospect of working in an industry that was constantly evolving. Things were going well until our senior year of high school when everything started to fall apart. It started with small things. Ethan began to pull away from me, making excuses not to hang out as much. He started spending more time with a new group of friends, people I didn't know and didn't really want to know. At first, I thought it was just a phase, that he was just trying to expand his social circle before we graduated and went our separate ways. But then, things took a darker turn. Ethan started experimenting with drugs. It was nothing major at first, just smoking weed with his new friends. But it quickly escalated. I remember the first time I found out. He showed up at my house one afternoon, high out of his mind. His eyes were bloodshot, and he was talking a mile a minute, barely making any sense. I was shocked. This wasn't the Ethan I knew, the guy who was always so level-headed and in control. I tried to talk to him about it, but he brushed me off, saying it was no big deal, that he was just having a little fun. But it was a big deal to me. I had seen what drugs could do to people, and I didn't want that to happen to my best friend. But no matter how much I tried to reason with him, he wouldn't listen. He was in too deep, caught up in the thrill of this new lifestyle. Things came to a head one night a few weeks before graduation. Ethan and I had been planning to go to the same university, but I could tell he was starting to have doubts. He kept talking about how he wasn't sure if college was the right path for him, how maybe he wanted to take a year off to find himself. I knew what that really meant. He wanted to keep partying, keep getting high, without the responsibility of school weighing him down. We got into a huge fight that night. I was furious with him for throwing away everything we had worked so hard for. I accused him of being selfish, of not caring about our friendship or our future. He accused me of being uptight, of trying to control his life. It was the worst argument we had ever had, and it ended with Ethan storming out of my house, slamming the door behind him. I didn't hear from him for days after that. When I finally did, it was through a mutual friend who told me that Ethan had been arrested for possession of drugs. My heart sank when I heard the news. I knew he was spiraling out of control, but I never thought it would get to this point. I wanted to go see him, to try and help him, but I didn't know how. I felt powerless, like I was watching my best friend destroy his life, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Ethan was released on bail a few days later, but he was different. The spark that had always been in his eyes was gone, replaced by a dull emptiness. He wouldn't talk about what had happened, wouldn't talk about anything, really. He just shut down, retreating further into himself. It was like he had given up on everything, on our dreams, on our friendship, on life. I tried to be there for him, but he kept pushing me away. It was like he didn't want to be saved, like he had resigned himself to this new, darker path. It broke my heart to see him like that, but I didn't know what else to do. I was losing my best friend, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Graduation day came, and it was supposed to be a day of celebration, a day when we could finally say goodbye to the hell that was high school and look forward to the future. But it didn't feel that way. Ethan showed up late, looking disheveled and barely coherent. He didn't even have his cap and gown. He had forgotten them at home. I remember looking at him, standing there on the edge of the crowd, and feeling a deep sense of loss. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. We were supposed to be celebrating together, looking forward to the future we had planned. But instead, it felt like everything was falling apart. After the ceremony, I tried to talk to Ethan, to see if there was any way I could reach him, but he brushed me off again, mumbling something about needing to go meet up with some friends. I watched him walk away, and I knew that our friendship was over. The Ethan I had known, the Ethan who had been my best friend for the past 4 years, was gone, and I didn't know if I would ever see him again. I went to college alone that fall, moving into a small dorm room on the campus of the university we had both dreamed of attending. It felt surreal to be there without Ethan, to be starting this new chapter of my life without the person who had been by my side for so long. I tried to focus on my studies, to throw myself into my coursework and my new life, but there was always this nagging feeling in the back of my mind, this sense of emptiness where Ethan used to be. A few months into my first semester, I got a call from Ethan's mom. She told me that Ethan had overdosed and was in the hospital. My heart stopped when I heard the news. I dropped everything and rushed to the hospital, but by the time I got there, it was too late. Ethan was gone. I stood there in the sterile hospital room, staring at his lifeless body, and I felt a wave of emotions crash over me: grief, anger, guilt. I couldn't believe that this was how it ended, that this was what had become of my best friend. I blamed myself for not being able to save him, for not being able to stop him from going down this path. I kept thinking about all the things I could have done differently, all the ways I could have tried harder to reach him. But it was too late for that now. The funeral was a blur. I remember standing by his grave, listening to the priest's words, but they didn't register. All I could think about was how unfair it all was, how Ethan had been full of potential, full of life, and now he was gone. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had failed him, that I had let him down when he needed me the most. After the funeral, I withdrew even further into myself. I stopped going to classes, stopped talking to people. I just didn't see the point anymore. Everything felt meaningless without Ethan. The dreams we had shared, the plans we had made, they were all gone now, buried in the ground with him. It wasn't until I hit rock bottom that I realized I needed to do something to pull myself out of the darkness. I knew that Ethan wouldn't have wanted me to give up on everything we had worked for, that he would have wanted me to keep going, to live the life we had dreamed of. So, I made the decision to get back on track, to focus on my studies and try to build something out of the ashes of the life I had lost. It wasn't easy. There were days when I didn't want to get out of bed, days when the grief and the guilt were almost too much to bear. But I kept pushing forward, kept reminding myself that I was doing this for both of us, that I was living the life that Ethan didn't get to live. Slowly but surely, I started to find my way again. I threw myself into my coursework, working harder than I ever had before. I joined clubs, made new friends, and started to build a life for myself at the university. It wasn't the life I had imagined, the life I had planned with Ethan, but it was something. It was a start. I graduated with honors 4 years later, with a degree in marketing, just like we had planned. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I couldn't help but think of Ethan, of how proud he would have been, of how this was supposed to be our moment. I dedicated my degree to him, knowing that I wouldn't have made it this far without him. After graduating from college, I moved to New York City with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The city was a far cry from the quiet suburb I grew up in, and it felt like the kind of place where anything was possible. I had a degree in marketing, a head full of dreams, and a determination to succeed, but I was also haunted by the memory of Ethan. As much as I wanted to make the most of this new chapter in my life, there was a part of me that was still carrying the weight of his loss. But I knew I had to move forward, and that's exactly what I set out to do. My first job out of college was at a mid-sized marketing firm in Manhattan. The company, Vector Strategies, was known for its aggressive approach to digital marketing, and it quickly became clear to me that this was no place for the faint of heart. The pace was relentless, the competition fierce, and the expectations sky-high. I was thrown into the deep end from day one, managing client accounts, creating content strategies, and analyzing data like my life depended on it. It was overwhelming, but I thrived under the pressure. I poured everything I had into my work, often staying late into the night to perfect campaigns or to pitch new ideas to the higher-ups. It was during one of those late nights that I met Emily. Emily was a senior account manager at Vector, and she had a reputation for being one of the best in the business. She was sharp, confident, and had a knack for getting clients to say yes to anything she proposed. I had noticed her around the office. Everyone had, but we hadn't really interacted much until that night. I was struggling with a particularly challenging client, and she happened to be passing by my desk when she noticed my frustration. Without hesitation, she sat down next to me and started asking questions about the campaign. Her insights were spot on, and within an hour, we had completely revamped the strategy. The client loved it, and from that moment on, Emily and I became fast friends. Our friendship quickly grew into something more. Emily and I were two sides of the same coin, both driven, both ambitious, and both eager to make our mark on the world. We spent almost all our time together, whether it was working late at the office, grabbing drinks after work, or exploring the city on weekends. It wasn't long before our professional relationship turned into a romantic one. We tried to keep it under wraps at first, worried about what the office gossip mill might churn out, but it was hard to hide how we felt about each other. We were good together, both personally and professionally. Our strengths complemented each other perfectly. Where I was more analytical and data-driven, Emily was creative and intuitive. We started brainstorming new ideas for campaigns and pitching them to our bosses, and every single one of them was a hit. We quickly gained a reputation as the go-to team for any high-profile client, and our success didn't go unnoticed. Within a year, we were both promoted to senior positions, with the accompanying pay raises and perks. But as much as we enjoyed our success at Vector, there was a part of us that wanted more. We weren't content with just being employees. We wanted to build something of our own, something that would give us the freedom to pursue our own ideas and visions without being constrained by corporate politics or client demands. We started talking about the possibility of starting our own marketing agency, a place where we could take everything we had learned at Vector and use it to create something truly innovative. The idea started as a fantasy, something we talked about over drinks after a long day at the office. But the more we talked about it, the more real it became. We started sketching out business plans, coming up with potential names for the company, and brainstorming ways to differentiate ourselves from the countless other marketing agencies in New York. The more we planned, the more we realized that this wasn't just a pipe dream. It was something we could actually do. After months of planning, we finally took the leap. We both resigned from our positions at Vector, which was a huge risk, but we were confident in our abilities and in the potential of our idea. We had saved up enough money to get us through the first few months, but we knew that we needed to start generating income quickly if we wanted to stay afloat. We rented a small office space in Midtown Manhattan. Nothing fancy, just a couple of desks, some basic furniture, and a decent view of the city. We named our company Elevate Marketing, a nod to our goal of helping businesses elevate their brands to new heights. It was just the two of us at first, handling everything from client acquisition to campaign execution, but we were determined to make it work. Our first client was a small tech startup that was struggling to gain traction in a crowded market. They had a great product, but their marketing efforts had been lackluster at best. Emily and I dove into the project with everything we had, conducting market research, revamping their branding, and creating a comprehensive digital marketing strategy that would help them stand out from the competition. We worked around the clock for weeks, tweaking and refining every aspect of the campaign until it was perfect. When we launched the campaign, the results were immediate and impressive. The startup saw a significant increase in website traffic, social media engagement, and, most importantly, sales. They were thrilled with the results and immediately signed on for a long-term contract. Word of our success spread quickly, and before we knew it, we had several new clients knocking on our door. Within the first year, Elevate Marketing was generating over $500,000 in revenue. We were charging clients anywhere from $20,000 to $50,000 per month for our services, depending on the scope and complexity of the campaigns. We were able to hire a small team of talented marketers, designers, and data analysts to help us handle the growing workload, and we moved into a larger office space that better suited our needs. By the end of our second year, our revenue had doubled to over $1 million annually. We had secured contracts with several high-profile clients, including a luxury fashion brand and a well-known financial services company. We were working with some of the most talented people in the industry, and our campaigns were consistently outperforming those of our competitors. We were on top of the world, and it seemed like there was nothing we couldn't achieve. But success came with its own set of challenges. As our company grew, so did the pressure to keep up with the demands of our clients. We were constantly pushing ourselves to deliver bigger and better results, and the stress started to take its toll. Emily and I were working longer hours than ever before, often going days without seeing each other outside of the office. The passion and excitement that had driven us in the beginning were slowly being replaced by exhaustion and burnout. And then, just when it seemed like things couldn't get any more stressful, a major scandal rocked our company. It started with one of our biggest clients, a high-profile tech company that we had been working with for several months. We had just launched a major campaign for them, and the initial results were promising. But then, out of nowhere, the company's CEO was accused of embezzling millions of dollars from the company's funds. The news broke like a bombshell, and within hours, the company's stock price had plummeted and their reputation was in tatters. We were blindsided by the scandal, We had no idea that anything like this was going on behind the scenes, and we were completely unprepared for the fallout. The client immediately terminated their contract with us and several of our other clients, concerned about the potential impact on their own businesses, followed suit. Within a matter of weeks, our revenue had dropped by nearly 50%, and we were scrambling to keep the business afloat. Emily and I were at each other's throats. The stress of the situation brought out the worst in both of us, and we started blaming each other for the company's problems. Every little disagreement turned into a full-blown argument, and it wasn't long before our relationship started to crumble. The tension at the office was palpable, and our employees were walking on eggshells, unsure of what was going to happen next. Things came to a head one night after yet another heated argument. Emily stormed out of the office, saying she needed some space to think. I didn't hear from her for days, and when she finally did come back, she told me she was leaving, both the company and our relationship. She said she couldn't handle the stress anymore, that she needed to take a step back and figure out what she wanted out of life. I was devastated. Not only was I losing the person I loved, but I was also losing my business partner, the person I had built this company with from the ground up. I felt like my whole world was falling apart, and I didn't know how I was going to keep the company going without her. For a while, I tried to manage things on my own. I threw myself into my work, trying to pick up the pieces and keep the business from collapsing. But it was too much. Without Emily, the creative spark that had fueled our success was gone. Our campaigns started to fall flat, and our clients began to lose confidence in us. I was working harder than ever, but it felt like I was just spinning my wheels, getting nowhere. It wasn't long before I had to make the hardest decision of my life. I knew that if I didn't do something drastic, I was going to lose everything I had worked so hard to build. So, I made the painful decision to sell the company. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but I knew it was the only way to salvage what was left. I found a buyer fairly quickly, a larger marketing firm that was interested in acquiring our client list and absorbing our team into their own. The sale went through smoothly, and while it was a relief to finally have the weight of the business off my shoulders, it also felt like the end of a chapter in my life that I wasn't ready to close. I walked away with a decent payout, enough to start over if I wanted to, but I didn't know what I wanted anymore. The success, the money, the prestige, it all seemed hollow without Emily by my side. I spent the next few months drifting, trying to figure out what to do with my life. I traveled, took up new hobbies, tried to reconnect with old friends, but nothing seemed to fill the void. It was during this time that I reconnected with an old college friend, Sarah. Sarah and I had been close in college, but we had lost touch after graduation. She had moved to the West Coast to pursue a career in tech, and we had drifted apart. But when she heard about what had happened with the company, she reached out to me, and we started talking again. Sarah was working as a product manager for a successful startup in San Francisco, and she had been following my career from afar. She was surprised to hear that I had sold the company, but she understood why I had done it. She also knew how much I had loved the work, and she encouraged me to get back into the game. At first, I was hesitant. The idea of starting over, of building something new from scratch, was daunting. But the more we talked, the more I realized that I wasn't ready to give up on marketing. It was in my blood, and I couldn't imagine doing anything else. Sarah suggested that we team up and start something new together. She had a background in product development and a deep understanding of the tech industry, and she believed that there was a huge opportunity for a marketing agency that specialized in tech startups. She was right. There were countless tech companies out there with great products, but no idea how to market them effectively. We started brainstorming ideas, and before long, we had a solid business plan. We decided to focus on a niche market, early-stage tech startups that needed help with branding, go-to-market strategies, and digital marketing. We knew that these companies didn't have huge budgets, so we came up with a pricing model that was flexible and scalable, allowing us to grow with our clients. We launched our new company, Nexus Marketing, with a small team and a modest office in San Francisco. We started out charging clients between $10,000 and $25,000 per month, depending on the scope of the project. Within the first 6 months, we had secured contracts with several promising startups, and our revenue was growing steadily. By the end of our first year, Nexus Marketing was generating over $750,000 in revenue. We had built a reputation for being the go-to agency for tech startups, and our client list included some of the most exciting new companies in the industry. Our team had grown to over 20 people, and we had moved into a larger office in the heart of the city. But just when it seemed like everything was finally falling into place, disaster struck again. One of our biggest clients, a fast-growing AI startup, was accused of using unethical practices to train its algorithms. The news broke just as we were about to launch a major marketing campaign for them, and it sent shockwaves through the tech industry. Investors pulled out, the company's valuation plummeted, and they were forced to lay off half their staff. The scandal had a ripple effect on Nexus Marketing. Other clients, worried about their own reputations, started distancing themselves from us. We lost several major contracts, and our revenue took a significant hit. Once again, I found myself scrambling to keep the business afloat. Sarah and I were under immense pressure, and it started to take a toll on our relationship. We had always worked well together, but the stress of the situation brought out the worst in both of us. We started arguing more, disagreeing on how to handle the crisis, and it wasn't long before our friendship started to fray. In the midst of all this, I received a call from Emily. It was the first time I had heard from her since she left, and I was shocked to hear her voice. She told me she had been following the news and wanted to offer her support. She said she had made a mistake leaving the company and that she had regretted it ever since. Emily's call threw me for a loop. Part of me was angry with her for leaving, but another part of me missed her and wanted to believe that we could work things out. She suggested that we meet up to talk, and despite my reservations, I agreed. When we met, it was like no time had passed. The chemistry between us was still there, and we quickly fell back into our old rhythm. Emily told me she wanted to come back to Nexus Marketing, that she believed we could turn things around if we worked together. She had been working as a consultant since leaving, and she had a lot of ideas for how we could rebuild the company. It was tempting. I knew that Emily was one of the best in the business, and having her back on board could be exactly what we needed to get through the crisis. But there was also a part of me that was wary. I wasn't sure if I could trust her again, especially after everything that had happened. After a lot of soul-searching, I made the decision to bring Emily back. I knew it was a risk, but I also knew that we needed all the help we could get. Sarah was hesitant at first, but she eventually came around to the idea. We all agreed that we needed to put the past behind us and focus on the future. With Emily back on board, we started working around the clock to rebuild Nexus Marketing. We revamped our brand, restructured our pricing model, and launched an aggressive new business development strategy. It wasn't easy, and there were times when it felt like we were fighting a losing battle, but slowly, things started to turn around. We managed to secure a few new clients, and with Emily's help, we delivered some of our best work yet. Our revenue started to recover, and we were able to rehire some of the staff we had lost. It was a long road, but we were finally starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But just when it seemed like things were getting back on track, another bombshell dropped. Sarah came to me one day with a confession. She had been approached by one of our competitors with an offer to buy her out. They were offering her a substantial sum of money, and she was seriously considering it. I was blindsided. Sarah had been my rock through all of this, and the thought of losing her was devastating. I tried to convince her to stay, but she had already made up her mind. She said she was tired of the stress, tired of the constant ups and downs, and she wanted to take the money and start fresh. I was heartbroken, but I understood. Sarah had been through a lot, and she deserved to be happy. We parted ways on good terms, and I wished her the best of luck. But losing her felt like losing a piece of myself. After Sarah left, Emily and I continued to run Nexus Marketing together. We managed to keep the company going, but it was never the same without Sarah. The spark that had driven us in the beginning was gone, and it felt like we were just going through the motions. Over time, I started to lose my passion for the business. The constant pressure, the never-ending cycle of highs and lows. It was all too much. I had built this company from the ground up, but I no longer felt like it was mine. It was time to move on. I made the decision to sell Nexus Marketing. It was a difficult choice, but I knew it was the right one. I found a buyer, a larger marketing firm that was interested in acquiring our client list and team, and the sale went through smoothly. I walked away with a substantial payout, enough to start a new chapter in my life. But as I closed the door on Nexus Marketing, I couldn't help but feel a sense of loss. I had poured everything I had into that company, and now it was gone. It was the end of an era, and I wasn't sure what was next for me. In the years since selling Nexus Marketing, I've taken some time to reflect on everything that happened. I've learned a lot about myself, about business, and about life. I've made mistakes, but I've also had incredible successes. And through it all, I've come to realize that the most important thing isn't the money, the success, or the accolades. It's the people you share it with. I've reconnected with Sarah, and we've started talking about the possibility of working together again. This time, we're taking things slow, making sure that whatever we build next is something we're both passionate about and committed to. As for Emily, we've gone our separate ways again. She started her own consulting business, and from what I hear, she's doing well. We're not in touch anymore, but I wish her the best. After selling Nexus Marketing, I took some much-needed time off to recharge and reflect on everything that had happened over the past few years. I traveled, spent time with old friends, and even took up some hobbies I had neglected during the hectic years of running a business. But as much as I enjoyed the break, there was always a part of me that was itching to get back into the game. Marketing was in my blood, and I knew that I wasn't done yet. During this time, I reconnected with Sarah. We had stayed in touch casually after she left Nexus Marketing, but our conversations grew more frequent as I began to think about what I wanted to do next. Sarah had been working as a consultant, helping tech startups with product development, but she wasn't entirely satisfied with the work. She missed the energy and creativity of running a full-fledged marketing agency, and it wasn't long before we started talking about the possibility of teaming up again. This time, we were determined to do things differently. We had both learned a lot from our previous experiences, and we wanted to build a company that reflected our values and vision. We spent months brainstorming, planning, and laying the groundwork for what would become our new venture, Zenith Marketing. Zenith Marketing was more than just a marketing agency. It was a full-service consultancy that offered everything from branding and digital marketing to product development and go-to-market strategies. We wanted to create a company that could partner with businesses at every stage of their growth, helping them navigate the complex landscape of the modern market. We started small, with just the two of us and a handful of clients, but it wasn't long before the business started to take off. Our reputation for delivering exceptional results spread quickly, and we began to attract larger clients and more significant projects. Within the first year, we were already generating over $1 million in revenue, and we knew that we were onto something special. As the business grew, so did our team. We hired some of the most talented marketers, designers, and strategists in the industry, and we quickly outgrew our original office space. We moved into a larger office in Manhattan, but even that wasn't enough to accommodate our growing team. By the end of our second year, we had opened a second office in Brooklyn to keep up with the demand. Zenith Marketing was a success beyond our wildest dreams. But it wasn't just the business that was thriving. My relationship with Sarah was also stronger than ever. Working together had brought us closer, and it wasn't long before we started talking about taking the next step in our personal lives. After years of ups and downs, we were finally in a place where we felt secure and happy, and we decided that it was time to make it official. We got engaged on a beautiful summer evening in Central Park. It was a simple, intimate moment, just the two of us sitting on a blanket by the lake as the sun set behind the city skyline. There were no grand gestures or elaborate plans, just a heartfelt proposal and an overwhelming sense of joy and contentment. We both knew that this was where we were meant to be, and we couldn't wait to start our life together as husband and wife. We began planning our wedding, which was set to take place the following summer. It was an exciting time, filled with venue tours, cake tastings, and dress fittings. We wanted the day to be a reflection of our journey together, a celebration of everything we had overcome and accomplished. It was shaping up to be the perfect day, and we couldn't have been happier. But just when everything seemed to be falling into place, my past came back to haunt me in the most unexpected and shocking way. One evening, as Sarah and I were finalizing our guest list, there was a knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and when I opened the door, I was shocked to see my parents standing on the doorstep. It had been years since I had any contact with them. Years since I had walked away from the toxic environment they had created. I had made peace with the fact that they were not a part of my life, and I had never expected to see them again. But here they were, David and Carol, looking older but still carrying the same cold, stern expressions that I remembered from my childhood. I stood there in stunned silence, unsure of what to say or do. "Can we come in?" my father asked, his tone as demanding as ever. Reluctantly, I stepped aside and let them in. Sarah was equally surprised to see them, but she greeted them politely and offered them a seat. The tension in the room was palpable as we sat down, and I braced myself for whatever it was they had come to say. "We heard about your new business," my mother began, her voice dripping with the same condescension I had grown up with. "It seems like you've done quite well for yourself." I nodded, unsure of where this was going. "Yes, Sarah and I have worked hard to build Zenith Marketing." My father leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "That's exactly why we're here. We believe we're entitled to a share of that success." I blinked, not sure I had heard him correctly. "Excuse me?" My mother's expression hardened. "We raised you, provided for you, and gave you everything you needed to succeed. We believe it's only fair that we receive some compensation for our investment in your future." I was speechless. The audacity of their demand left me reeling. They had been nothing but a source of pain and negativity in my life, and now they were trying to lay claim to the success I had built without any help from them. I could feel the anger rising in me, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I don't owe you anything," I said firmly. "I built this company with Sarah, and everything I've achieved has been through my own hard work. You had nothing to do with it." My father's face darkened. "You're making a mistake, son. We're not asking. We're demanding our share. If you don't comply, we'll take legal action." Sarah, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke up. "You can't be serious. This is absurd. You have no right to any part of this business." My mother sneered. "We'll see about that." I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "I think it's time for you to leave. You're not welcome here, and I suggest you don't contact us again." My parents glared at me, but they stood up and headed for the door. Just as they were about to leave, my father turned back and delivered one final, chilling blow. "You should know," he said, his voice cold and calculating. "The person who investigated us a few years ago, the one who uncovered the truth about our financial situation, he's our adopted son. He's been working against you this whole time." I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. I had no idea what he was talking about, but the implication was clear. They had another son, someone who had been secretly working against me, someone who was now a part of this twisted scheme. Before I could respond, they were gone, leaving me and Sarah in stunned silence. We spent the next few days trying to make sense of what had happened. I did some digging and discovered that my parents had indeed adopted a son a few years ago, a man named Thomas who worked as an investigator for a financial firm. He had been the one to uncover the shady dealings my parents had been involved in, which had ultimately led to their financial downfall. It was all starting to make sense. My parents had adopted Thomas in a desperate attempt to clean up their reputation and get back on their feet financially. And now, they were using him as a pawn in their scheme to extort money from me. Sarah and I knew we had to act quickly. We hired a lawyer and prepared for the possibility of a legal battle. We knew that my parents didn't have a leg to stand on, but we also knew that they were desperate and would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. Sure enough, a few weeks later, we were served with a lawsuit. My parents were suing me for a portion of Zenith Marketing, claiming that they were entitled to a share of the business based on the investment they had made in my upbringing. It was a ridiculous claim, but we had to take it seriously. The legal battle that followed was grueling. My parents, with the help of Thomas, pulled out all the stops, trying to paint me as an ungrateful son who had benefited from their sacrifices and was now refusing to give them their due. They dredged up every painful memory from my childhood, twisting the narrative to suit their agenda. But Sarah and I fought back. We presented evidence of my parents' neglect and emotional abuse, showing that they had done nothing to support me in my pursuit of success. We also provided documentation proving that Zenith Marketing had been built entirely by me and Sarah, with no involvement or support from my parents. The case dragged on for months, each court appearance more stressful than the last. But we never wavered. We knew the truth was on our side, and we were determined to see this through to the end. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge delivered a verdict in our favor. The lawsuit was dismissed, and my parents were ordered to pay our legal fees. It was a vindication, but it was also bittersweet. The victory had come at a cost. My relationship with my parents, already strained, was now completely shattered. I knew that I would never have any kind of relationship with them again, and while that was painful, it was also a relief to finally be free of their influence. But the ordeal wasn't over. Just when we thought we could finally move on, we received a shocking piece of news. Thomas had been arrested for fraud and embezzlement. It turned out that he had been using his position at the financial firm to steal money from clients, and he had been under investigation for months. His arrest was all over the news, and it quickly became clear that my parents had been involved in his schemes. It was a scandal that rocked their already fragile world. My parents' reputation was in tatters, and they were facing serious legal consequences. They had been using Thomas as a way to regain their financial footing, but now that plan had blown up in their faces. As I watched the news unfold, I felt a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, I was relieved that justice was being served, but on the other hand, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pity for my parents. They had made so many wrong choices, hurt so many people, and now they were paying the price. But there was no going back. I had to protect myself, my business, and my future with Sarah. We decided to distance ourselves from the drama and focus on what mattered most, our life together. As the dust settled, Sarah and I threw ourselves back into the business. We expanded our services, opened a second office in Queens, and continued to grow Zenith Marketing. Our success was a testament to our hard work and determination, and we were proud of what we had built. But more importantly, we focused on our upcoming wedding. We decided to keep it small and intimate, inviting only our closest friends and family. We wanted the day to be a celebration of our love and commitment, not a spectacle or a show. The wedding day was everything we had hoped for. We exchanged vows in a beautiful garden ceremony, surrounded by the people who mattered most to us. As I stood there with Sarah, looking into her eyes, I knew that I had finally found my home, my place in the world. All the pain and struggles of the past had led me to this moment, and I wouldn't have changed a thing.